Hey, what's up everyone, Julian here, hope you're all good and thanks for joining me in this video where we're going to be building a very simple Flask application and deploying it to a virtual machine. Now we're going to be using Google Cloud for this because we can get a free instance of a virtual machine, but you could use any other cloud provider like DigitalOcean, Linode, AWS, it's absolutely up to you. We're going to be using GitHub as a remote repo where we're going to push our code and then pull it in from our server. Now this is going to be a simple tutorial. We're not going to be setting up custom domains or serving any HTTPS traffic. It's just going to be a very simple IP address followed by the application itself. So let's jump into the demo. And this is what we're going to be building. It's just a single page Flask app where you send in a query string and it's going to serialize that and then dump the keys and values back out into a table. So this really isn't about the app itself, and I want to leave that up to you. But let's go ahead and get started. I've got a GitHub repo set up here, just a brand new empty repo. And what you also need is a Google Cloud account set up and logged into the console. So just go ahead to, I think it's cloud.google.com to get started and create a new project. And you can do that just by clicking on this new project, or you can just use the default one. So first things first, let's go ahead and actually build our app. So I'm here in a terminal in an empty directory. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new virtual environment. So python -m venv. I'm going to also throw in a custom prompt of Flask. Go ahead and create the virtual environment. Now we're going to be using Nginx and uWSGI on the server. So Nginx is a web server and that's going to handle any requests coming in from the web. So request comes in, Nginx handles it, and then it does what's called a reverse proxy, which is going to kind of internally send that request to uWSGI. Now uWSGI is a super powerful kind of cross-platform library. We can use it for all sorts of things. It can be a web server, it can be an application server, and it can do all sorts of crazy low-level stuff. But for us, we're going to just use uWSGI as our application server. So request comes in, Nginx handles it, sends that to uWSGI, which then calls our application. So we need to activate our virtual environment. So source env bin activate. There we go. If we pip list, we don't have any packages. So pip install flask uwsgi. So these are the only two dependencies that we're going to be using. I probably should have upgraded pip, but never mind. Let's get our packages installed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up this directory in Visual Studio Code, and we can do that with code followed by a dot. So let's go ahead and start building out our app. And you guys can find the source code for this links in the description, because I'm going to be copying and pasting a few things because we need to keep this speedy. So let's go ahead and create a few files. So the first file we're going to create is called run.py, and this is going to be the entry point of our application. I'm going to create a new folder called app, and then inside app, a new file, _init_.py. So the init.py file is what we use to bring our app together. And then another file called views.py. This is where we'll write our application views. And then a new folder called templates, and that's going to be inside of our app. And then a new folder called public, and inside public a new file called index.html. Now I'm just going to copy in what we've got in index.html because otherwise it's just going to take forever. But if we take a quick look, you can see it's really not a lot of HTML, and we're just using Ginger here to do a for loop over the keys and values of the query string arguments. So go ahead and drop that in, or just copy the code, however you want to do it. Let's go ahead and move on to our init.py file. So from Flask, import Flask. We need to go ahead and create our Flask app. And we do that by creating a variable called app and passing in dunder name to Flask. Then we need to from app import views. And that's everything for now in our init.py. Let's jump into our views, and what we'll do is from app import app. And what we're doing here is just importing the app object here that we created in our init.py into our views, because we need to use it to do things with the app, like create routes, app.route. We're also going to from Flask import render template and request, because we're going to use request to pass those query string arguments coming in. So let's go ahead and create our route, and we'll do that with app.route. So we'll use the app.route decorator. Def, I'm just going to call it index. Then what we'll do, I'm going to create a variable here called args and just set it to none. And then if request.args, so if a query string is in the URL, then we'll go ahead and args equals request.args. And request.args, if you remember, is going to give us a nicely parsed dictionary of keys and values of the query string arguments. And then we're going to render template. And we're going to pass it public because that's the name of the directory, and the file is called index.html. And then we'll go ahead and pass in args equals args. And I'm just going to copy that. And if the request doesn't include any arguments, then it again is just going to return the same HTML page, and the args variable will be set to none. So that's everything for our views. That's everything for our init.py. We just need to create our entry point. So from app, which is the app directory, as you can see, from app import app. And what we mean by import app is this callable here, or this object. So from the app package, import the app object. If _name is equal to dunder main, we'll go ahead and app.run. Okay, so let's quickly test our app here locally. Clear the terminal. Export Flask app equals run.py. Export Flask _env equals development and Flask run. And if we jump back into our browser, and there we go, we can see everything's up and running. If we pass in another query string, let's do hello equals world. There we go, we get our nicely parsed query string arguments here in the table. And let's do app equals Flask, and there we go. So that's how the app works. Very, very simple. So that's all good, but we need to add a couple more files. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into VS Code. So we obviously don't want to run our application using the development server on the server. We want to use uWSGI. So what we're going to do is we need to create a couple more files. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it dev.ini. Now, uWSGI allows us to use ini files to create some configuration. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have two. We're going to have dev.ini, which we're going to use to run uWSGI in our development environment for testing. And then we'll have app.ini, which we're actually going to use on the server. So here in dev.ini, I'm just going to paste in what we've got. And I've put comments on these because I want you guys to be able to go and take a look and see what some of these things do. I'm not going to explain them in this video because we need to keep it quick. So that's everything for dev.ini. Let's go ahead and create another file called app.ini. And again, this is what we're going to use in production. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste. And the thing with uWSGI, there's so many different configuration variables and things you can do with it that is just going to take too long to explain in this video. So go ahead in your own time and just do some searching and check out what some of these variables do. So app.ini is going to be our production ini file. Let's go ahead and create a config file. So new file, we'll call this config.py. And if you guys have watched my video on Flask app configuration, then you'll know about this file. And because we're not really doing anything with this app, our configuration file is going to look very basic, and in fact it's not really going to be doing anything. But it's here in case you do want to set some configuration variables. You can use this template, and maybe you want to add another one below it of a testing config, but for now we've just got config, production and development config. So I'm going to go ahead and save that for now. And we're not in fact even going to be using this secret key because we're not using the session, but it's there if you guys need it. So that'll do for config, app.ini and dev. And let's go ahead and throw in a gitignore .gitignore, perfect. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste. There's one thing though that I do want to quickly touch on in this gitignore. Oh, I've spelled it wrong, that's why. My bad. Rename git ignore, right. So if we scroll down here to the bottom, you can see that I've commented out this config.py, and that's because I'm going to be pushing the config up to the repo, just so you guys can see it. But in reality, you would want to uncomment this, and you don't really want to have your configuration files in version control. So what you'd want to do is, once you create the server, move into the server, and then create the config file there. You don't really want this in version control. You know, you're going to have things like database passwords, usernames, secret keys, etc. You don't want to share that with the world. And even if it's a private repo, you just never know what can happen. So I'm going to leave that commented out for now, but in reality, you probably want to uncomment this and find a different way of getting your configuration file up to the server. Okay, so that's our gitignore. We need to go ahead and create a requirements.txt file, and we can do that from the terminal if we do pip freeze right arrow requirements.txt, and there we go. If we take a quick look at it, we can see we've got a list of our dependencies. So this is what we're going to use to install our packages on the server. We'll use the requirements.txt file. Okay, so I think that's everything in terms of files that we need. You may want to go ahead and create a README depending on what you're doing with your app. But why don't we go ahead and run our app with uWSGI locally. So to do that, we can do uwsgi and then give it the ini file. So ours was called dev.ini. You might have to allow that. And if we take a quick look at dev.ini, we'll just run through a couple of things. So we've got the module variable here, which is set to run:\app. And what that means is the first argument here is the name of the Python file that contains the callable object. And in our case, the callable object is app. So if we look at run.py, we can see we've got this app object, which we've imported. Optionally, you could achieve this with this syntax. So WSGI file equals run.py, and then the callable is app, but this is just kind of a shorthand. And we're serving this on port 9090. So let's jump into our browser here, and if we replace port 5000, which was a Flask development server, with 9090, you can see we get the same thing, but however, this is not the Flask development server. It's now being run with uWSGI. So if we pass a query string, foo equals bar, there we go. So that's how you would run run your Flask app with uWSGI locally. Control C to kill that process. So I think we're good. I think that's everything for the application itself. So what we can do is move on to actually pushing it up to our repo. So in the terminal, let's go ahead and git init. If we run ll, we can see we've got our .git file. If we then go to git status, we can see we've got all these files that we need to add. I'm going to do git add dot to add everything. Then we'll go ahead and git commit -m, and we'll just call this git init. Awesome. We need to add our remote origin, so I'm just going to copy what we've got here and drop that in. and then we'll go ahead and push this up to our repo. Alright, so our code is now in our remote repo. We can finally move on to our server. So over here in the console of Google Cloud, we want to go ahead and either set up a new project or just use the default. Then what you want to do is navigation menu, compute engine, VM instances. And I've already got one set up that I was playing around with on a different project. But what you want to do is go ahead and create a new instance. Give the instance a name. So I'm just going to call this Flask demo. You can change all the regions and stuff. I'm just going to leave these as default. Now in machine types, if you want a free virtual machine, you can go ahead and click on the micro instance. And you can see here your first 744 hours are free. So this is basically just a free virtual machine if you need it. But as you can see, it is very small, so it completely depends on your use case. For this example, I'm going to set up this one with 2 CPUs just to make things a bit quicker. Now, next thing is the boot disk. I want to use Ubuntu 18.04, so I'm going to go ahead and change this. And I'm going to select the Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. And then just to make this demo a bit quicker, I'm going to change it to an SSD. So that should install things a little quicker. Next thing you want to do is in the firewall section here, hope you guys can see this, is head down to allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic. And that is everything for now. So we can go ahead and create our virtual machine. So this might take a minute to spin up, so I'll pause the video here and catch up with you guys when this is done. All right, so our VM has been created. So what I want to do is set up a firewall rule. And this is totally optional, you don't have to do this, but I want to show you how we can test our application on the server with uWSGI before we go ahead and set up Nginx. So if we jump into the VM instance and head to edit, I want to tag this instance. So I'm going to come down to network tags and throw in a Flask tag. And then that is everything for now, and just go ahead and click save. And what this is going to allow us to do is create custom firewall rules and then apply those rules to any VM that has a certain tag. So what we can do is come to the navigation menu again, head down to VPC network and firewall rules. We're going to create a new firewall rule, and I'm just going to call this uWSGI testing. So uWSGI testing, and we'll just say test on port 9090, because that is the uWSGI port that we've set up in our INI file. So then scroll down, leave everything as default, and in here where you've got target, we're going to make sure that's specified target tags, and in the target tags we'll go ahead and throw in Flask. And what this is going to do, like I said, is just apply this firewall rule to any VM instance that is tagged with Flask. And then in the source filter, make sure you've got IP ranges selected, and then in the IP range itself, 0.0.0.0/0. Leave second source filter as none, and in here in the specified protocols and ports, you want to tick TCP and then 9090. Then go ahead and click create. Let that fire up. Okay, so that's been created. So if we head back to our compute engine VM instances, and then on our Flask demo one, if we go to view network details, this is just to double check. Here we go, we've got our uWSGI testing, which has been applied to this VM. And you can see here, you've also got the defaults, which we selected when we created the VM. And what this does, it just allows certain ports to be available over the network. So that's all good. We're going to come back and delete this shortly. So let's jump in to our VM. And I'm just going to use the default SSH terminal that the Google Cloud provides. So go ahead and connect. And of course, you can connect through your terminal and you can download and install all of the Google Cloud utilities on your machine. And they're really nice to work with, but just to keep this quick and make sure everyone can use it, we're just going to use this terminal. So first thing we want to do with any machine is update it. So we can do that with sudo apt date to update the packages. Okay, so we've updated our machine. Now, by default, Ubuntu 18.04 does come with Python 3, and we can see that if we do Python 3, we've got 367. I'm going to quit this, and I don't want 367, I want 372. And for that, I want to install it using pyenv. So if we head over to the pyenv GitHub, I'll throw a link in the description. We're just going to copy and paste all of the instructions here to get up and running. So you want to come down to instructions or installation, copy this line here. What this is going to do is, oops, let me move this over here. What this is going to do is just go ahead and clone the pyenv repo into our home directory. If we run ll, we can see we've got pyenv here. So let's follow along with the installation instructions. We need to add a few lines here to our bashrc file. So I'm just going to paste that in. But what you need to do, in fact, I should probably make this a bit bigger, is not bash profile. We want to change that to bashrc. So go ahead and enter these commands. Again, change this to bashrc, and this is just creating some aliases here in our bashrc file. And then we've got the final one we need to add. Again, change this to bashrc, and then the last thing we need to do is reload the shell. So go ahead and exec shell, and there we go. We need to install a few dependencies to build Python. So you can get that by clicking on this pyenv wiki link just here under the exec shell command, and then scroll down to Ubuntu Debian/mint. I'm going to copy everything here and go ahead and install all of these dependencies that we need to build Python. So I'll pause the video here while this does and see you guys on the flip side. Alright, so we've installed all of the build dependencies needed for Python. So we can go ahead and run pyenv versions, and we'll see that we don't have any versions installed on this system. So let's go ahead and get 372. So we can do that with pyenv install and then the version number you want. So 3.7.2. And this might take a while, so again, I'll pause the video here and catch you guys in a sec. Alright, so that took a few minutes, but we got there. And now if we run pyenv versions, we can see we've got 372. So we now need to set that as our system Python. So we can do that with pyenv global and then the version number, so 3.7.2. Now if we launch Python, alright, we've got 372. Awesome. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to pull in our source code from our repo. So what we can do, we're going to we're going to clone our repo here into our home directory. So just make sure you're in your home directory. What we can do is jump into our repo here, clone or download. We'll go ahead and copy the URL here, and back in our terminal, click git clone and go ahead and enter the URL. We run ls, we've got this Flask YT demo. Now I want to change this name, and you guys should too if you want to follow along. So we can do that with mv, fl and tab, and I'm just going to change this to app. Go ahead and do so, run ls, and there we go. We can cd into our app directory. We run ls, there we go, we've got our files. So the first thing we need to do is create a virtual environment and install our dependencies. So let's go ahead and python-mvenv, and if you do want to follow along, just make sure you do call it env. Okay, if we run ls, we can see we've got our env directory, so source env bin activate, Okay, and if we do pip list, we can see that we don't have any packages installed. So pip install -r requirements.txt. This is going to go ahead and install the dependencies in requirements.txt. And we didn't have many, so it shouldn't take too long, but uWhiskey can take a while because it is quite a big package. So let that do its thing. Okay, so we've got our packages. If we do a pip list once again, we can see there we've got Flask, we've got uWhiskey, and a few others that come along for the ride. So first thing we need to do, I want to test this application with uWhiskey before we install and configure Nginx, but we need to sort out the firewall. So by default, this machine is not going to allow any connections on port 9090 just yet. So if we do sudo ufw status, we can see that the firewall is inactive. So the first thing I'm going to do is activate the firewall. So sudo ufw activate. Oh, I don't think it's activate actually, I think it's enable. So sudo ufw, and let me just clear this. So sudo ufw enable, go ahead and click Y. Now we want to enable a new rule to allow connections on port 9090 just temporarily. So sudo ufw allow 9090. And now if we do sudo ufw status, we can see here that we can now access our web server on port 9090. So why don't we go ahead and run our dev.ini file just like we did here on our local machine, just to quickly test it out on our server. So we can do uwsgi dev.ini. Okay, so uWhiskey is running. And now what we can do in our cloud console here, if we go to our application, in fact, we need to get rid of HTTPS and just go to port 9090. And there we go, we are running our application on the server using uWhiskey. Now this is not a production ready spec, it's just for testing. So go ahead and throw in a query string, so foo equals mar. All right, everything's looking good. Throw in another one, hello equals world, and there we go. Okay, that's enough fun for now. Go ahead and stop uWhiskey with Control-C, we'll go ahead and clear. And that's all working. So what we can do, we can go ahead and delete that firewall rule that we just set up. So we can do, we need sudo ufw delete allow 1990. And now we go sudo ufw status. We can see that rule is inactive. And what we can do, we can quickly jump back into Compute Engine, head to VPC network, firewall rules, and we don't need this rule anymore, so we can go ahead and delete it. Okay, that's fine, that will be deleted. So let's jump back into the terminal and move on. And in fact, we don't need our virtual environment active anymore, so we can go ahead and deactivate that. So next thing we need to do is go ahead and install Nginx. So what we can do is go ahead and sudo apt install Nginx, click on Y. So before we can go ahead and use Nginx, we need to enable it in the firewall. So a command we can do is sudo ufw app list, and because we've just installed Nginx, ufw is going to see this as an application, and for this example we're only going to be serving traffic over HTTP on port 80. So what we can do is go ahead and sudo ufw allow, and then a set of quotes there, and Nginx HTTP. All right, so now if we go ahead and do sudo ufw status, we can see we've allowed Nginx on HTTP, so port 80. And if we jump back into our server here and get rid of the query string and the port number and just go to the server's IP, you can see we get the welcome to Nginx homepage. So that's all up and running. So Nginx is running, but of course we still need to do a couple of things. So next thing we need to do is go ahead and, well, in fact, another thing we can do just to check Nginx is up and running is do sudo systemctl status Nginx, and we can see that Nginx is up and running here, and we use the systemctl to check that's up and running, and we're going to come back to systemctl and systemd just shortly. So let's clear the terminal, and we need to go ahead and set up a few things. We need to create what's called a systemd unit file, and what this file is going to do is it's going to automatically run our app when the server boots. So if the server goes down or if we reboot the server, the service itself that's going to run our application is going to boot up and run. So we need to create a unit file. So what we can do is go ahead and create that with nano. So sudo nano, and the path is etc systemd /system, and then we need to create what's called a service file. So I'm going to call ours app.service, make sure I spell that right. So etc systemd system and then app.service. What I'm going to do just to keep this speedy is just copy and paste, and you guys can get this source code link in the description. But we need to do a couple of things here. We need to change where we've got your username, and you want to replace this with your own username, and you can find your username at the beginning of the prompt in the terminal here. So mine was Julian James Nash. We've got to change this a few times. Got a typo there. Make sure you spell all of these right, otherwise we are going to get an error. And finally, the last one. Okay, so just a couple of things here. Obviously the user is your own username, the group is www.data. The working directory, as you can see, is home, and then the username followed by the app directory that we renamed. So this is where our source code is living. We've got this environment variable, which is going to set our path to the virtual environment that we've created. So ours is in home, and then username app env, which is the name of the virtual environment we created, followed by bin, and bin contains all of the binaries for the virtual environment. You know, it includes pip, includes Python, etc. And then this exec start variable is pointing to the location of uWSGI. So this is where we did a pip install uWSGI. This is where that is located. And then this flag here is the ini file that we're going to use to run our app. And ours was app.ini. So that's everything for now. We can go ahead and Control X and then Y and then enter. So we need to start enable this this app.service file that we just created. So we can do that with sudo systemctl start app, and then sudo systemctl enable app. That's going to create a symlink. And then we can check it's running with a sudo systemctl status and then app. And we can see here this is up and running. If you guys had any errors or typos in the app.service file, they would probably show up here. You'd probably get a message like no directory found, or there'll just be some kind of error. So I definitely recommend, if you are following along with this guide, just use all of these same file and directory names and you'll be absolutely fine. So we can go ahead and click Q to quit that. I'm going to clear the terminal again. So the last thing we need to do is configure Nginx. So we need to create a new file in the sites available directory. So we can do so with sudo nano, and that's located in etc nginx. Yep, sites available, and I'm going to call this file app. Go ahead and click enter. And again, just to keep this quick, I'm going to have to copy and paste in what we've got, but it's very, very simple. So we've got this single server block listening on port 80, and we need to change this here where I've got your IP address. If you were setting up a custom domain, this is where you would put in, you know, example.com, www.example.com. But we're not, we're just going to use the IP address of our server. So in the Cloud Console here, let's head back to Compute Engine, VM Instances. And we can grab our external IP address, go ahead and copy that. And back in here, just in server name, you want to go ahead and paste that in. So you can do obviously all sorts of cool things with Nginx. You know, we can listen for not just HTTP but HTTPS traffic. You can use certbot to create certificates. So I think that might be something that we'll cover in a future guide, but for now it's just going to be the IP address served on HTTP. So then we've got this location block here, and we need to go ahead and change our username. And what this is going to do is it just includes the uWSGI params, which is just kind of a file with some uWSGI parameters, variables. And then what this uWSGI pass does is just reverse proxies any requests coming into Nginx to our uWSGI. And if we look at the path here, we've got home and then our username, followed by the app directory, which we created, followed by this app.soc file. And this app.soc file is created in the app.ini file that we created. So I think that's everything for now. So we can go ahead, Control X, Y, and enter. We need to do a quick syntax check. So we can do sudo nginx-t. What this is going to do, if there's any syntax errors in the sites available, it's going to go ahead and flag that as an error. We also need to link our this app file here in sites available. So we can do that with sudo ln-s, and then we're going to give it the path. So it's etc nginx sites available and app, and then we're going to link that to /etc/nginx sites enabled. So go ahead and do so, and why not just run the syntax check again. Okay, so we need to restart Nginx for these changes to take effect. So we can do so with sudo systemctl restart Nginx. So whenever you make any changes to this sites available file, you need to go ahead and run sudo systemctl restart Nginx. So I think that's everything. I think we can actually go ahead and see our application here in the browser. So if we go to our IP address, we don't need to include the port because we're now using Nginx to handle the requests and do its reverse proxying to uWSGI. So here we go, we're up and running. So we can go ahead and send a query string. I'll do hello equals world. There we go. Let's go ahead and do another one. Foo equals var. And okay, we got another one in there as well. App equals Flask. All right, so you guys can see the app is up and running. So that's how easy it is to get a Flask app up and running on a Google Cloud virtual machine, or any virtual machine in fact. So what we can do, if we want to make any changes to our app, how do we go about doing it? Well, of course, there's loads of different things you can do, like you can have pipeline set up, so when you commit changes, it automatically, does a hook, which is going to pull in code and run a git pull command on your machine. But I think for now, what we'll go ahead and do is just, let's make some changes locally. So let's fire up VS Code. And why don't we just change something in our index.html? So let's just change simple Flask demo from a Google Cloud VM. Let's run it locally, so Flask run. If we head back to our browser, and here we are, we're in the development server. Oh no, because that's on 1990, of course. So let's change that back to port 5000. And there we go, we can see we've got our changes, and if we just send a query string, hello equals world, there we go. So we've made some changes here on our application locally. So what do we need to do? Well, of course, this is the point where before you make these changes, you would have maybe created a new branch, done some testing, and then merged those changes back into the master branch. But for now, for the sake of this demo, we're just going to make these changes here on master and then push them up to our repo. So let's do a git status, and we can see we've modified index.html. So let's go ahead and git add that file that we've modified, git commit -n, and then let's make a note of what we've done. So made changes to index.html title. Okay, so let's go ahead and push these up to our repo with a git push. Okay, so we've pushed our changes up to the repo, and if we take a sneak peek, app, templates, index.html, there we go, our changes have been made. So let's jump back into our terminal here on our virtual machine, and in the app directory, we can see here we've got our app.sock file that was created by our app.ini file. Anyway, let's pull these changes in. So we can do that with a simple git pull. And there we go. We've got our changes. We can see it's one file changed, public index.html. But if we head back to our application here on our server, in fact, I'm going to close this for now. So here we are. If we reload now, you can see our changes, they've still not taken effect. What's going on? Well, in fact, now it has. Which, okay, a bit of a weird behavior here. Maybe because I've done this before and there's some kind of caching going on. But what you would need to do now is sudo systemctl restart app. And what that's going to do is just going to reload the service, so any changes are now going to be taken into effect. And if we jump back in, there we go. We can see our changes have been updated here on our machine. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. Obviously, there's lots of different ways to deploy an application to a server. We can use Docker containers, we can use Kubernetes, we can use some of these hosted services such as Google App Engine. And I think what we're going to do, we are going to cover these in their own episode. So we'll wrap this application up in a Docker container, and we'll maybe deploy it to App Engine and maybe something like Heroku as well. So that will be it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, then feel free to drop them below. Again, if you want the source code, I'll throw a link in the description where you can find that at this GitHub repo. I'll also throw in a link to the text-based version of this guide, which you can see we have just here. So I do have a text-based version of this tutorial where you can get all of the commands in a very similar order to what we've done them in this video. So I'm going to wrap this up now. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.